Alrighty guys, this video is about helping you catch more mangrove jack. We've done a lot of it over the years and we're going to share all the secrets that work for us and our community with you guys in this video. So tune on in and it's going to help you guys catch more mangrove jack. Alrighty, so when it comes to chasing mangrove jack, there's so many variables that come into play, like your lures falling off the couch, but I'm going to run you through all of the things, the bare essentials that you need to keep in mind. Now, tip number one, it is very, very important that you're running tight drag, okay? Out of everything that you're doing, drag is the key. Reason being, mangrove jack, they come out and they always attack your lures, usually heading back to the structure. So it's not about like the size of your leader that you're using, how thick your braid is. Running a tight drag is crucial. In fact, I like to run a lighter leader but heavier drag because at the end of the day, mangrove jack, they're not getting giant above 10, 20 kilos. They're a relatively small fish in the grand scheme of things. So running a tight drag is critical in turning their head and not allowing them to pull that little bit of drag, because if that mangrove jack eats your lure close to the structure and it's a foot away from the, say, the rock bar or that log, it only needs to get about a foot of distance, and then if your braid hits that log or the rock, it's going to pop. So running the tight drag, not allowing them to run, is a very, very important factor to help you land those fish. Okay, tip number two is looking for fish in the right areas. Mangrove jack, they're a very timid species and they don't like to be out in the open. They're nothing like a flathead or a brim that's going to be out grazing, similar to trevally. They like to stay hidden and they're a very timid fish. So when you're chasing mangrove jack, you need to be targeting the fish in the right areas. Key areas to look for, obviously you can fish pontoons, that kind of thing where there's a lot of structure. You can fish rock bars. You can fish big kind of, if you've got a big open area and there's a big fallen tree on like a pivot point where there's lots of current running, or even if it's a big stretch of river and there's a big tree that's fallen down and it's been there for a while, there'll be jacks hanging in there. So you want to be targeting jacks in areas where there is a lot of structure. Now that's pretty straightforward, but I do often see people, if there's a big long rock bar, they'll start at the top and fish all the way down. But sometimes it's better off finding those big isolated bits of structure where there's a lot of current, and that's often where the jacks will be hiding. So moving on to the next tip, it's really important to get your lures into that kind of bite zone. Now, you will at times, especially if you're fishing surface, jacks will come out off structure, but a lot of the time, they don't like to venture too far from their home. As I said, they're very timid. So you'll see a lot of people use bait casters when chasing jacks, and that's because you can get your casting accuracy super dialed. But you can do the same thing with spin too. So ensuring that your lures, like you want to be losing lures when you're jack fishing, because it means you're getting your lure deep into the structure. Now, whether you're skip casting, you know, under snags and fallen mangroves, or you're casting at pontoons or big rock bars, you want your lure so close to the structure that you almost feel like you're getting snagged every single time. And that's one of the reasons we like to fish certain setups that allow us to get it in the structure, which I'll move on to the next point. But yeah, getting your lure right into the zone is critical. Now, when it comes to the lures of choice, obviously a lot of people have used jerk baits for many, many years as they are super productive. But a lot of the zones that we like to fish, there's so much structure around that you can go through a lot of jerk baits, and at the end of the day, they're an expensive lure. So we like fishing a lot of soft plastics. And some of the rigs that we like to work with, in particular the last few seasons, is running like a snake lock head with a weedless hook, which means you can get the lure down deep, you can get it into those big structures like the fallen trees and stuff. Because it's rigged weedless, you can get it down to where the fish might be hanging. And you can't really do that with a jerk bait because they've got two trebles usually on them. So rigging a 3.25 inch death shad or a 5-inch death shad is a great option. Now, if you're fishing open rock bars or pontoons where you can actually have just a stock standard exposed jig head is fine. The second you start fishing those super snaggy areas where it might be tight creeks, there's lots of submerged snags with big trees, which is what I like to fish. We run something like a snake lock jig head with a weedless worm EWG style hook, which means you can get it down deep and you can roll it through all the timbers and the rocks and it won't get snagged. And it's a really, really productive way to get those jacks to eat. Now, when we're fishing areas with lots of structure, we do like to fish surface, and we fish both our death shads and our death frogs, obviously surface. They're both a floating lure, and they actually kind of both offer different kind of capabilities. Now, if we look at the death shads, the death shad in a 5-inch, I really like using for skip casting on my bait caster because it's heavy enough for my bait caster to kind of, it's got enough weight so I can skip it quite far. A jack's got no problems engulfing that whole thing. They're such an aggressive eater that if I'm skip casting on spin, I'll use the 3.25 inch death shad. If I'm skip casting on my bait caster, I'll use the 5-inch death shad, both rigged on weedless worm hooks, so unweighted. And then the death frog is my new favorite in the 5-inch and the 3.25, which is the smaller version. So again, if I'm fishing my bait caster, I'll fish the larger frog. If I'm fishing my spin rod, I'll fish the smaller frog. And it's funny, on different days, sometimes it's big lures they're after, on some days it's the smaller lures. So the death frogs and the death shads are both great options rigged weedless because they skip cast incredibly well, they do float, and they both provide a pretty unique action. The frog, I mean, the action on these things is just deadly, but on the death shad, the actual kind of blooping sound that comes from this big, thick tail on the surface is deadly. Really, really productive. So if we're fishing surface, we'll be throwing frogs and death shads, skip casting them on both spin and bait cast. I would recommend, if you're new to skip casting, starting on spin, and then if you know what you're doing, bait casters are a great option because you can really dial that accuracy. Okay, the next question. When to target mangrove jack? Now, obviously there are species that is really good to chase in the warmer months. They like warm water and they like the activity that comes associated with the warmer months, which is increased storm activity, increased water temperatures. The rivers become alive with nutrients and bait flow. You get bigger tides. So everything about summer caters to a mangrove jack. They love it. Now, when should you be targeting these fish? The rule of thumb is low light conditions is prime. So early morning, late afternoons. You can obviously target them in the middle of the day, which I'll address in a moment, but if you're new to jack fishing and you want to increase your chances, get out there in the dark in the morning so you're at your zone just on first light. Don't get to the boat ramp at like 6:30 when the sun's already come up and then you get to your zone. Most likely you've missed that key little window. And then the same thing applies for the afternoon. You kind of want to get to your areas, pick your points that you're going to fish, and then fish all the way until dark. And I say this in pretty much all of our videos, is stealth is key. So try and stay nice and quiet. If you can keep the tunes down, if you can keep your buddies in the boat nice and quiet, it definitely increases your chances. You'll see a lot of guys who fish some areas where we like to fish when we're not actually getting fish. People who are going there in kayaks are getting numbers because that stealth element is so important. So you've got to remember, like if you're using your electric engine, that's got a lot of noise underneath the water. If you're kind of banging around, especially in aluminium boats, all of that noise is transitioning to the fish and it can turn them off. So be as stealthy as you can, target those fish in super low light conditions, either in the morning or the latter part of the day. Now, if we're moving on to a daylight bite, which is still super productive, in fact, one of our PBs came last season, which was in the middle of the day. Total like unlikely conditions, but I can explain to you why mangrove jack will still chew in the middle of the day. They're a super aggressive fish, okay? They will often feed in those lower light conditions, but they're very territorial. So if you're chasing jacks in the middle of the day and you try and coincide it with a low tide, that is prime. Reason being, low tide's really good in the middle of the day because the water clarity is often a lot dirtier and jacks don't like clean water. I wouldn't ever really chase jacks in the middle of the day on a super high tide when it's crystal clear. If I'm going to be chasing them in the daytime, I'd be looking for those big low tides when the water's super dirty, because the jack feels a bit more hidden with its murky conditions. And then also the bait fish have less area to hide, and also the bait fish are sitting in dirty water, so that it's a lot easier for the jacks to come out and chew. So if you're chasing them in the middle of the day, pick those lower tide conditions and you're going to definitely increase your chances. Okay, so we've talked about chasing them in early mornings, late afternoons, and in the middle of the day. Now, if you can coincide this with massive shifts in the barometer, whether it's a barometer that's been sitting high, like 10, 20 plus, and it's falling down to, low kind of 1001s, hectopascals they call it, shifts in the barometer is really good. Now, that can often come with some pretty atrocious conditions, but that's okay. That's kind of what jacks like. If you've got lots of storm activity, barometers like going through the roof or barometers dropping, that's a really good indicator. It sends mangrove jack in particular, it can send them pretty crazy. You've got to be mindful. You don't want to be out there during storms when there's lots of lightning, like you need to be pretty mindful of the conditions. But if you can get out there when it's a little bit turbulent, you've got some big storm activity, the barometer's swinging all over the place, that's a really good way to be chasing them. And then if you are out there during the day and it's like that, often you'll have overcast conditions, sometimes a bit of rain. That's even better because it's creating lower light conditions. My most hated conditions for jacks is chasing them in the middle of the day, on a beautiful day with no wind, clear, glassy water, that is not what you want to be looking for. You want to look for turbulence, dirty water, big tides, lots of flow, low light conditions, and big swings in the barometer, and that will definitely help you catch more fish. Now, when it comes to the setups that we recommend you using, I can see a lot of people go super, super heavy often when you're chasing jacks. In fact, I did it. I used to run such heavy gear when you're chasing jacks, but I don't think it's as required because gear's getting so good these days. So these are the two outfits that I will chase jacks with. I've got a 3000 Vanford, and then I've got a 13 Concept Z here. Now, both of these are spooled with, I think, 15 to 20 pound braid, and then I'll run 20 pound fluorocarbon leader. Maybe I'll go to 30 pound, but usually it's 20 pound fluorocarbon. I always fish fluorocarbon too. So these are the setups. And then in terms of the rod, it's a 4 to 8 pound, this one, but it's quite stiff. And this is a 6 to 12 pound, I believe. So that is more than enough backbone to turn the fish's head when need be. And I keep a pretty solid drag, so they can't really pull any line unless it's a really big jack. And you're just going to have to get used to losing a lot of fish. That's what happens when you're jack fishing. It just happens. They're such an aggressive fish in the way that they hit your lure. They don't come out and eat it. They come out and turn and then eat it on the way back to the structure. So that's why they're so addictive. They're just such an aggressive fish. But they are the setups that we fish. I wouldn't recommend going much heavier than like a 4000 spin reel. And these should do the job. So I'll start to wrap things up for you guys. But ultimately, when it comes to jack fishing, the most important thing out of everything is to be patient. Jack fishing is incredibly challenging. You can have years where you catch heaps of fish, and then there's years where it just doesn't go your way. That happened to me last year. I put in so much time with very few fish to show for it, and that's jack fishing. You need to be patient. If you've got the right gear set up, you're fishing in the right locations, you're targeting them in those lower light conditions with, kind of low water clarity depending on where you live. You really want to be focusing on those areas where the fish are going to be located. You're going to increase your chances. You just got to put in time, okay? Use the right gear. When it comes to lures, for example, if you go to the Missing at Sea website, we've got a bundle specifically for chasing Mangrove Jack. That is the easiest option. And we kind of select the colorways for you. And then, you just got to get out there and put in the time. Get the casting accuracy right. Look for the right signs. Take note of water clarity, barometer levels. Kind of talk to other people and see what's happening in your area, because often what's working for a guy, say an hour or two up the coast, won't work for you in your local fishery. You've got to figure out what works for you in your local area, and you're going to increase your chances. So fish surface, fish them down deep, run a tight drag, get your casting accuracy on point, and fish those super snaggy structured conditions with lots of current. Look for bait, and I guarantee you this year, you're going to catch lots of jacks.